to order. Mr. LeGrand's phone reflects, no, I'm kidding, 8:02. And we will, let's see. Oh, there is no public comment, right? No. And first business item is action items, Warm, Safe and Drive projects update.
Yes, the Warm, Safe and Dry project list is in your packet. We bring this twice a year to update based on priorities and changes in the district. So what we're asking for, and this is typical, is approval of 2 years' worth, which would include the next priority column and the second priority column. We're getting towards the end, so there's a lot left in the to be determined column. So we're getting towards the end of time and money. Getting the 2 columns approved allows us, if there's something becomes an emergency, it allows us to address, still within the dollar limits we're given. I would note there's really only 2 changes in here. One is under Colville School, where we've added a line item for $500,000. This will allow us to get the design work done starting about Labor Day. We want to start selecting a consultant and have the design done for what we need to turn that into a high school and start the work for whatever has to be done to move students in for the fall of 16. We probably won't do everything, but we want to get started. We want to have the full design so we know how we're going to make that work when we have students in the building. And we need to really determine what that program needs within the building. Once the bond is passed in November, we'll turn the rest of that job into a bond project rather than a Warm, Safe and Dry project. But we want to make sure that we do whatever we have to do to be ready for fall of 16.
Good.
The other significant change in here is at GRPS University. We have been approached by a group that would like to have a fairly long-term rental agreement in there, which would provide us with some significant income. However, there's some things they would need done to the building. So that would allow, the 2 items are air conditioning and parking. The air conditioning would be on the classroom side. It would allow us to, if that agreement comes to fruition, to get that work done with the understanding a portion of that, or a good portion, is going to be reimbursed by their fees. Whether that happens, we're not sure, but by putting it in here, it gives us the opportunity, if it does, to make that project go. Otherwise, there aren't, the other projects are basically updates in costs from that standpoint.
It's good to have somebody leasing space.
Although, yeah, and this is, honoring the ghost of John O'Connor. Look at that going down the line. We want to make sure that we're not giving the space away, and what the terms are, and what we've got a reliable tenant and all that. But thanks for teeing that up. That's certainly appropriate to be, getting ahead of the curve if it's a good deal for us.
And I think, what has it been, 2 or 3 years that the superintendent, must have been 3+ now, that you've reevaluated sort of, we were sort of giving away rental space, et cetera, and now we tend to do it at market value. So there are a lot of systems in place that are safeguarding against that too, just for the record.
The problem, yeah, although, just.
It's a good point.
The problem is there is no such thing as market value for schools.
Right.
So you're always in a tricky position, and so some things can look good, some things can look bad. Some of our schools are very, very hard to find any alternative use for. Some of our schools are eminently reusable, and so I think that's why it's good to have the board take a look at these things and give feedback. So I appreciate you bringing that up that early and showing us all the pieces of the puzzle, because it's not like renting out, Class A space on Ottawa Street, or like renting out an apartment on Heritage Hill. I mean, it's a much more complex job you've got, and I appreciate you working on it.
And the benefit in this situation is what they need is goes directly to what we would need long term anyway. Right. It's not something that would be for them, and then we wouldn't use it. Those are 2 things we've been talking about irregardless.
Right. We're not painting the building neon orange for them or something.
Not yet.
That would be nice. If you got That's something to get some piano on.
Anything else?
Maybe get more traffic.
All right, so we need approval of this action item?
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, looks like we are moving forward. Reports, updates.
Maybe you just want to keep going,
Well,
Ken.
Okay,
Warm
I'll
Safe
do-
and Drive
I'll
update.
do
since you're-
Okay,
the warm, safe, and
yeah.
dry. We are well underway. We have projects going on at about a dozen buildings. The two major projects that just started are restrooms at Congress and the remaining restrooms at Fountain Building. Those are on a tight schedule. We did get a real good start on them, so we're well underway. Another major project that's continuing that we started earlier is the pool air handler at Union. That we started in April in order to be done for the swim season in August. Otherwise, we have 4 other masonry projects going on. Congress, Central, Stocking, and North Park. We've got exterior work and roof work going on at Mulick. We have quite a few going on. Nothing as big as last year, but the same amount of dollars total. And we made a real push to get started as soon as school got out. Our goal is August 1st to be done. That's always a tough goal. Our window is now down to about 6 weeks of summer, trying to get done by August 1st. That gives us a little flexibility, but that's our goal.
Great. Any comments, questions?
Good.
Onward.
Yeah, the financial information, again, that's included in your packet, both the summary dashboard and some of the detail. You know, the board work session last Monday where we talked about and you approved Amendment 2, you know, really reflected a best estimate of where we thought we'd be at year end. And if you look at through May, those results through May, you know, framed in part where we think we're going to be. We know will continue to be adjustments as we approach our fiscal year end in June and grant programs close out and other normal year-end adjustments, additional information becomes available for us. So we're tracking as we had expected. You know, we're tracking in terms of where we expect to come out through Amendment 2. We made that adjustment. You made that adjustment last Monday. And so really what we're waiting on now is to finish the year end of this month and then get into our year-end audit and have our final results for our fiscal year 14. As we talked about last Monday, you know, we've had a history of picking up a little bit at end of the year. We hope that is the case again this year. So we can, as you know, we're looking at a very tight budget for next year, which we will get address tonight. But that's where we stand financially. I mean, we're still doing fine from a cash flow perspective. You know, we're essentially closed out our purchasing as of the end of this year. You know, people haven't bought stuff now, they're done. And so we're really positioning ourselves to start the new fiscal year on July 1st.
Any questions, comments? Great. Let's move on then. Policy. Action items, nothing, I think. Here we just have reports and updates. Sustainability update, Kristen Trevino.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Mrs. Aldridge.
So one of the things I've been working on over the past few months is looking at putting in place some utility benchmarking software for our buildings. We have a process right now where we have, you can imagine, 60 plus electric accounts, 60 plus gas accounts. They all get invoiced on different parts of the month. And then they get, you know, paper copies come in, copies made, things like that. So it's kind of a tedious, time-intensive process for our staff to be tracking that and be, you know, can track it in a spreadsheet. But looking at a very low-cost option for us to automate all of that and import that data directly into some cloud-based software allows us to weather normalize the data and allows us to basically pick out the outliers, what buildings are not performing well, which buildings are performing really well, or as expected at least, and set some different alarms for sensitivity basically, so we can identify those, and it helps us over the long term identify which buildings really could utilize energy efficiency investment. So it's helping us identify those savings opportunities. And then once we do put in some energy efficiency retrofits, it allows us to track the impacts of that. We can, for example, watch our utility bills and see that they're going down, but to attribute which percentage of that to the actual retrofit, especially when you might be doing a couple of different things in a building at once, or renovating or changing the use of it or things like that, it can get a little complex. And so to make sure that we are making the best decision as to how to allocate the resources, and then making sure on the back end that investment paid off and that our assumptions paid off, this is a really low cost solution for us to do that, and it takes away the tedious time of trying to hand key in all of the bills at different times throughout the month and things like that. So we're working on that, working on getting that online this month. So over the next 2 weeks, we should have that. We're working on entering all building data now and getting that up and running. That should be a huge time saver for the district as well. And then with our greener grads, I mentioned this a couple months ago. We had graduation. We had some bins
Big
out.
box out there.
Yeah, yes, we did. So we've collected somewhere between 10 and 15% of our gowns, with more of them still coming in. I've had some dropped off at my office a few times. I've actually had some teachers who either had their own gowns in their basement or their kids' gowns that they've been holding on to for 10, 15 years. And, nobody knows why they've held on to it for this long. So, they're still coming in. And so we'll continue to accept them. And really for a first year event, I spoke with greener grads and they said they were pleased with that collection rate for a first year event, because it's about building momentum and things like that. So yeah, it went well.
Great.
Saw those big bins out there. I thought of you.
Great. Great.
It's a good,
That's funny.
it's a good idea.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I'm having been trained by Mrs. Carver and not wanting to be an activist board member, I will put this all in the hypothetical. If I were an activist board member, I might be inclined to ask why on earth I'm still, there's such a good horse for me to get up on. I'm still sitting under incandescent bulbs a year after we hired you. Now, the software is neat, and building systems is great. I also feel like I'm channeling my old colleague J.J. Jandrzejak. At some point you want to actually get something done, and it's not that hard. We can sit around and we can analyze. We can have a group hug about where the most efficient place to invest money is. But I know that one of the most efficient places to invest money is in LED light bulbs, and I know that they've reached maturity and they're now cheap because I'm buying them for my house on Amazon all the time because they're cheap. This is not exotic technology, and it doesn't take a lot of analysis. So could we get on that? That'd be what I would ask if I were an activist board member.
We've had this priced out and a quote made for how much it would cost to change these out. We've just looked at it, and that these lights are not on, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, but we have schools that have T12 lights in them that are on, 10, 12, 13 hours a day, 5 days a week, that those are also extremely inefficient too. And so, we have inefficient light bulbs here, inefficient light bulbs elsewhere in the district. And so it's looking at, well, where are these locations that they're on the most, because those are the places you're gonna see the absolute most savings. And we wanna make sure that if we only have a finite pool of resources, that we're putting it to the most efficient end for the district. And so looking at a school like Mulek that has inefficient lighting, how much it would cost to, retrofit that or change that out. We've also looked at this lighting as well. So we've gotten the quote for this, and we'll be moving forward with it. But know that this is not the only, these aren't the only light bulbs in the district that are inefficient. So when we look at that, we look for the ones that are on the most.
So how many have we replaced in the last year?
I'll have to check with Tim Hopkins on that. He's in charge of that. Right.
And we do, I was going to ask, we had talked about, and we will be receiving in August, the energy report with this baseline data, then the annual report about that, and the facilities report that we've been looking for, and I think that that will give us some of this answer. And I think it's a slow, tedious process, and we talked about at the Ad hoc Sustainability Committee meeting, getting baseline measurements to know what we're doing in terms of a green revolving fund, and measuring, so then we can actually invest in new projects and see the return. So we are laying this groundwork. It does take a long time, but I think that this will be helpful, and it is exciting to see that it is actually happening within. I don't think it's that. I mean, that was a 2-year time frame, and we need to get an extra person in place here with a skill set in order to get this done. So we're moving forward, which is great. Anything else?
Nope.
And then,
Yeah, one last thing, including your packet. Obviously, over the last 6 months, as the budget has unfolded in Lansing, I know there has been a number of communications that have been sent your way with various analyses of the governor's proposal, the Senate, House of Representatives, the conference committee. A lot of information, sometimes hard to figure out what's applicable and what's, well, I mean, it's all applicable, but what are the more important aspects. And last week, I believe it was last week, finally, the governor did sign the budget. And so what I prepared for you is this about a dozen bullet points, I think, are probably the most significant with respect to the 15-16 year and school aid budget. So just quickly, and we talked a little bit about this already, as you can see, the foundation allowance went up for us $140 per student. We lost $120 per student because of the elimination of best practices and performance. So essentially a net per student foundation of $20 this year, or for next year, and then another $70 million allocated statewide to 31A programs, about $104 per pupil for Grand Rapids. And again, as we've talked about, there are restrictions on 31A dollars. They have been loosened over the last year, 2 years, so it gives us a little more flexibility and to our benefit as we develop the fiscal year 16 budget in terms of being able to have more flexibility with those dollars to help us through our little hole there. We've talked about before the fourth bullet point, there's $993 million going into the MIPSERS fund, unfunded liability. Statewide, it's about $660 per pupil that never sees a classroom. Comes out of this state aid or the school aid fund, but goes directly to MIPSERS essentially, and doesn't get to the classroom. That continues to be a drag on our funding. A new program, $26.5 million approximately in this third grade reading literacy. Specifics in terms of how it gets distributed have not been finalized yet. We know a portion of it's going to go to teacher training and a portion of it goes into the other areas, but that remains to be seen as we move forward here. No change in the GSRP, the preschool funding. That remains at almost $240 million statewide. Career and technical ed funding, which mostly is administered through the ISD, that has been increased $9 million statewide, so our ISD will get a piece of that. The TRIG grants, which we got about $300,000 in the current year, those have been reduced by $18 million to $23.5 million. So we'll see how that impacts us going. We'll still certainly apply for it when it's appropriate, but it's likely some of those dollars will be less. School-based health centers, additional $2 million. We're not going to expand our health centers at this point in time, so I'm not sure that will have any significant impact on our funding. Most of our funding for our health centers comes through Medicaid programs and partnerships with Spectrum Health. Additional $3 million allocated to adult ed. You may recall this current year, the adult ed funding was reorganized along these prosperity regions that the governor developed, so we get a pool of dollars for the prosperity regions, so that'll be increased. I think our adult ed budget is in the $4 million range, around something like that. Does that sound right?
Not quite that much.
Not quite that much. 3.5 million, maybe 3 million. So, but that'll hopefully bring a few extra dollars into our region, obviously, and specifically to our programs here. The enrollment count has been changed. Instead of the 90% current year fall count, 10% winter count, it's 10% the prior winter count. So a minor relief for those districts that are losing students, so the prior Februarys. So this year, fiscal year 16, we'll have the October count in October of 15. So we'll take 90% number and then 10% of our this past February count.
So that's gonna be bad for us.
No, it'll be good.
It's probably good. I mean,
We gotta get.
No, we're gonna gain.
we're going to gain, but
Right.
the good thing is, again, it's a 10% impact, so will have an impact, yeah, significant, no. And the legislators believe they were doing a favor for those districts that are, and maybe they are if you're losing lots of students year to year.
Right, but that's not us anymore.
So, not now. We've been helpful a few years ago. The itinerant staff, there's just surplus funds that have, it varies from year to year, that we get a chunk of it. Last year, 13, 14, we got a lot of dollars from that. That was one of the major year-end adjustments. But it's ranged anywhere for the county, for ISD, from 60,000 to last year was several $1 million. There has been talk over the years about changing that, fixing that, whatever the case may be. We had assurances all along the line that that would not be impacted this year. But yet, when the final school aid budget was passed and signed, those surplus funds now have been capped at $2 million. I think, John, they're still working on maybe a fix for that subsequent. Because I guess it even caught our lobbyists off guard, right, that got in there at the end. So stay tuned for that. And the last bullet point there is just summarizing the revenue, as we've talked about at the last work session last week. Foundation, only $338,000 of new money, because that's a $20 net increase, and the at-risk about $1.7 million, so about $2.1 million, which is about 1.6% increase over last year in terms of revenue. And that follows kind of we actually, on a percentage basis, got more new money last year than this year. And as I talked about last week, we're still woefully behind where we should be. And as you've heard in the last couple of weeks, it's catching up with all the districts now. The Forest Hills, East Grand Rapids, Zeelands, and are all running deficits and making cuts. So that's where things stand. But again, I'll summarize here for you there in about a dozen bullet points for your reference going forward. So, questions, comments?
Do you guys have any questions?
I don't.
I have a couple in terms of the $1A, so that we get that funding per pupil regardless of their status in terms of ELL or free and reduced lunch or anything. Every student.
Well, that's the estimate.
But then we can only use it.
Yeah, that's the estimate based on eligible people over the years.
Based on eligible,
yeah.
okay.
But again, the guidelines now have become more general.
Mm-hmm.
You have to use those dollars to improve third grade literacy, in 11th grade career and college readiness. So the state, to their credit, is focusing now more on outcomes versus regulating the inputs. So they've released the restriction. You still can't use it for administration. It's going to the classrooms, but you got to be able to prove that the way you've spent it, is in fact making progress in those two areas. So, and there's this next year, how strict they are in measuring those outcomes remains to be seen, because as you know, we changed from the ACT to the SAT tests, and some of the changes at the state level in terms of measuring literacy and that kind of stuff has changed. So this 15-16 year, they may be a little less strict on measuring those outcomes. Regardless, we have a plan as a district, or if you will, in terms of how to spend those dollars. And that's really been a focus in terms of improving literacy for years before this, and that was where those dollars were put last year. Previously in 31A, there's more restrictions, talked about class size reductions and supplementing versus supplanting types things, which still, that rule still holds for our federal programs, but by and large, not so much for 31A. So the ability for us this year, or this going into this next year, to be able to use some of those dollars more flexibly to relieve the stress on the general fund has been very helpful. But again, as legislatures give, legislatures can take away. So it's, this year it's been good. Whether it'll hold true for next year remains to be seen. But so.
And I'm sorry, I have one more comment.
Sure.
Maybe you guys, our question covered this at the last meeting, but the MIPSers, is that been an increase also as those expenses go up, even though it's a pass-through?
There is
or
a.
are we getting
No,
more
there-
cut in
They,
our bottom
they
line?
threw about $1 billion in, but it's not enough to cover the spread.
Yeah.
No, it's still a significant cost per dollar payroll to us. As I told the board, I think last Monday, there supposedly, because of the actuarial calculations and assumptions, the bad market years in the late 80s are going to fall off. There's supposed to be some relief this in fiscal year 17. Whether that comes to fruition or not, whether how much that relief might be, I don't know, but it's not going to go away. It still will continue to be a drain on our finances, as is all the pension plans of the state sponsors. They're all underfunded by significant amounts, and it's a promise we made that it's making it difficult to keep. So, but it's a way of life. You know, we can sit here and complain about what we want, but it isn't going to change.
Oh,
We
yeah.
live with it.
I just
and-
wondered if it's
and-
impacting our bottom line, then. They didn't increase it
But yeah, I
enough
mean, it's,
to
again, we
accommodate.
take $1 billion off the top
Oh,
number
for
through the
the-
classroom, you can do a lot statewide with an extra $1 billion in the
Right.
school aid fund, but again, that's not gonna change, so. We can complain a lot like the golfers did over the weekend about the course they played, but we gotta play by the same rules, right? So, gonna change.
Yeah. Well, and it's difficult to increase literacy at third grade if we don't have any more increase in the Great Start Readiness Program. Not serving enough. Well, I guess we are finished with our meeting. Any other questions, comments? We'll see everyone tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.